Ako niste čitali knjigu Connect the Dots još uvek, a čitali ste Bibliju, shvatit ćete možda najbolji prevod značenja faktora sreće i šta je sticaj neverovatnih okolnosti kroz onu izreku čudni su putevi Gospodnji. Kako smo se mi danas ovde svi zajedno našli, nije ništa drugo nego jedan rečit primer u praksi, na delu, kako se povezuju tačke. Prve dodirne tačke su možda bile negde 2010. 2012. kada sam ja bio na svojim executive MBA studijama na LSU i na NYU. Međutim, tada se tačke između mene i Christiana Buscha nisu spojile. Onda ide neki fast forward i dolazimo u sadašnje vreme. Moj dragi prijatelj Milutin Nikolić me zvao telefonom pre možda 10 dana. Molim jedan aplauz za Milutina. Koji je rekao, slušaj, ima jedan genijalac koji dolazi u Beograd, mnogo bi bio važan da ga naši ljudi vide, a jedino ti to možeš da organizuješ u tako kratkom roku. Čovjek dolazi potpuno privatnim razlogom. Tu sad dolazimo do sljedećeg ukrštanja tačaka na novom nivou, a to je da je Christian prvi put došao u Beograd. A zašto je došao u Beograd? On je srpski zet. Što nije mala stvar, s obzirom da mi je to jasno jer ja sam tast jednom srpskom zetu. Christian i Aleksandra Leksi, njegova supruga, su došli i juče su u crkvi na Kalemegdanu krstili svoju ćerku Lolu. Eto kako smo mi ovde danas. Sad, kako se stvari dešavaju neverovatnim sticajem okolnosti, jer su putevi Gospodnji čudni. Kad je mene Milutin zvao telefonom i rekao, jel možemo mi to? Mi smo bili u sred organizacije letnjeg Vivaldi foruma i to je bilo nemoguće. Onda sam ja to veče, bio je petak uveče, zvao našeg mladog kolegu Alekseja Janićević i pitao, Aleksej, mi možemo da organizujemo vidljivost za taj događaj u roku od 48 sati? I on je rekao, može, Ćale. Tako da jedan aplauz za Alekseja. Onda se povezivanje nastavlja, jer je bilo potrebno da organizujemo gde to može da se desi. Onda je naš partner Delta Holding i na čelu sa Marijom Desivojević rekla, kako da ne, mi ćemo brzo organizovati salu, iako smo u to vreme nenormalno puni i nemogući, tako dalje. Tako da jedan aplauz za Mariju i za Andreja, molim se. I onda sad ide to takvo razmotavanje i danas smo mi u ovom povezanom i kao slučajno sticajem neverovatnih okolnosti. Tu su naši najveći partneri i Delta i Telekom i naši prijatelji i Kristijanova porodica i gomila vas koji ste naši ili alumnisti ili pripadnici akademske zajednice. Naročito sam ponosan na to da smo mogli da poklonimo ljudima koji se bave obrazovanjem, koji studiraju ili koji uče i koji su ili su edukatori, da steknu jedno iskustvo koje je za sve nas dragoceno i novo. I ne samo što imamo vrhunskog gosta danas, nego imamo i neko ko deli sa nama jednu lepu temu koja se tiče faktora i uticaja sreće ili povezivanja tačaka, a mi kao narod i kao kulturna zajednica tako treba da se povezujemo i sa drugima, i sa poslovnim prilikama, i sa životom. I ja se nadam da ćemo imati prilike da na ovom događaju se neko sa nekim povezao, da će se možda neko dete roditi za 20 godina zato što se neko ovde upoznao, da će se možda neki posao napraviti. I da pređem na onaj, da kažemo, tehnički deo. Christian je, profesor doktor Christian Busch je autor 2 knjige, jedna je Serendipity ili faktor sreće, druga je povezivanje tačaka ili Connect the Dots, koju ste imali priliku sticajem neverovatnih okolnosti da dobijete, jer je i to bilo nemoguće naručiti iz Londona kratko i jednostavno i bez nekog stresa. A Christian je profesor preduzetništva, biznisa, inovacija i faktora sreće, angažovan je u 2 instituta i na Njujorškom univerzitetu i na Londonskoj školi ekonomije, predaje kao aktivan predavač i ja mislim da sam od ovih ključnih tačaka rekao sve. Christian, izvoli, dobrodošao i veliki aplauz.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Serjan. Dobar dan. Dobar dan. Dobar dan. It's wonderful to be here with you today. As Serjan said, we had a very meaningful day yesterday with the christening of our wonderful daughter. We're very proud of our Serbian heritage. My wonderful love of my life, Lexi, who's here in the first row. My wonderful mother-in-law, Nina, with her wonderful husband, Harvey. My parents here, wonderful friends, Milo and Ivana. And if you ever need PR, by the way, in Serbia, Ivana is the queen of it. And it's wonderful to be here with you today. It means a lot to us to have our daughter so early on in life be here and experience this beautiful hospitality. You can see already the wonderful food, it gets into the stomach right there. So it's wonderful to be here with you today. I'd like to take you on a journey of creating our own good luck to make our lives meaningful, purposeful, and have some success in it. Before I do this, I'd love to ask you and get a feeling for who's in the room please raise your hands if you consider yourself to have a lot of luck. Who of you considers yourself to have a lot of luck? Yeah? Okay, it's a very lucky room, eh? That's wonderful. I yesterday had a bird that shed on my arm. Apparently that's also a lot of luck, right? So I feel I'm a very lucky person too. But it's great that so many of you raised your hands, because one of the things we will talk about today is that those of you who consider yourself to be lucky or to have a lot of luck tend to have more luck in the future. Not because of some kind of abracadabra, it falls into your lap, or something falling from the sky, but because you tend to look at life differently. And so today we'll talk a lot about the mindset that we've seen in our research with some of the world's most successful CEOs and leaders and entrepreneurs that seems to be the one life skill that differentiates people who are truly successful from other people, which is that they are able to cultivate serendipity. They're able to see a little bit more in unexpected moments and then turn those moments into positive outcomes. And so today we'll talk about how do we build this mindset, this muscle, like going to the gym, right? We can build that muscle for doing that. Now, to give you a bit of context, I was made in Germany in 1984. 9 months before that, I guess, right? But Ulla and Rainer did a job there that worked out, and so it's wonderful to be here. And thank you for making it happen. So it's wonderful. I came into the world back then. I was kicked out of high school. I had to repeat a year. Probably held the unofficial world record of how many dustbins and trash cans you can knock over on your way to school when you're driving. And then when I was 18, in 2002, I wasn't so lucky anymore. I crashed into 4 parked cars. All cars were completely destroyed, including my own. And I won't forget the policeman who came to the scene, who looked into the car, and he said, "Oh, wow, he's still alive." And so this idea that I was supposed to be dead, that stuck with me. And I asked myself all these weird questions, If I would have died, who would have come to my funeral? Who would have actually cared? Was it all worth it? And at that point, I had mostly depressing answers, very depressing answers. And so it took me on an intense search for meaning, trying to figure out what is life all about? What is meaningful in life? What gives some kind of purpose in life? So if I ever again run in front of a car, it would be worth it. And so I started reading a wonderful book, highly recommended, especially for the times we live in, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about the question, how do we find meaning in tough circumstances? How do we find meaning in crises? And what do we do with our lives in that regard? So I read that book, and what I realized is that what gives me a lot of meaning is connecting ideas, connecting people on those sparks that come from that. And so on that journey then as entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, and later in academia, what I found fascinating is when studying successful entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, CEOs, they seem to have in common that they were extremely good at cultivating this serendipity. And I got very excited about the question, is there a science-based framework for this? Is there science to this luck that a lot of us are striving for? And so that's what I'll talk about now. But to be sure, we're on the same page. A couple of examples of serendipity. This is, the coffee shop example. If you have erratic hand movements like I do, you spill a lot of coffee. So imagine you spill coffee over someone in a coffee shop, and that person looks at you slightly annoyedly, but you sense there might be something there. You don't know what it is, you just sense there might be something there. And now you have a couple of options, right? One option is you just say, I'm so sorry, you walk outside, and you think, what could have happened had I spoken with that person, right? Or at a conference, that speaker, you bump into them, and you just say, I'm sorry, and walk outside and think, what could have happened had I spoken with a person? Or that unexpected idea in a meeting, right? Where it's unexpected, but you don't speak about it. And then you go outside and you think, what could have happened? Or another option is you speak with that person, and that person becomes the love of your life, your co-founder, your next business partner, you name it. The point is that our reaction to the unexpected moment, making the accident meaningful, is what creates that ultimate luck that we're so much striving for. Any ideas what this might be here? Any ideas? Oven? Any other ideas? Who's bidding more or less? Washing machine, yeah, we're coming close. What else? Microwave, yeah. I have a good feeling. I think we're getting there. Yeah. Yes, yeah, fryer. So this is yeah. Deep fry. Okay, I think we're very close. So this is a sweet potato washing machine. And the sweet potato washing machine, a couple of years ago, there's a big company in China called Haier, one of the largest white goods producers in the world. So they produce washing machines, refrigerators, and so on. And they, received calls from farmers. And the farmers told them, your crappy washing machine is always breaking down. Well, why is the washing machine breaking down? Well, we're trying to wash our potatoes in it, and it doesn't seem to work. So what would we usually do? We would probably try to educate the customer, right? We'll probably say, excuse me, customer, we built this machine to wash your clothes. Why dare you wash your potatoes in this? They did the opposite. They said, you know what? That's unexpected. But there's probably a lot of farmers in the world who have a similar problem. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? And that's how unexpectedly the potato washing machine became one of their products. Any ideas what this might be? Any ideas? Ibuprofen? I saw some smiles in the audience. Usually it's a good sign if nobody knows. And I won't tell who had the smiles on their face, no worries. I will not give you up. So this is a couple of decades ago. Some researchers gave people medication against angina pectoris, the pain in the chest. And they unexpectedly, this is Lola, by the way. Good morning, Lola. She just woke up. She always wants to be part of the action. She wants to be on stage and she wants to be around here. And so a couple of decades ago, some researchers gave people that medication against angina, and they realized there was some unexpected movement in the trousers of male participants. And what would we usually do? We would probably say, oh my God, that's embarrassing, right? That man seemed to have an erection here, right? Oh my God, let's ignore this. They did the opposite. They said, that is unexpected, but there's probably a lot of men in the world who might have a problem in this region, so why don't we develop a medication for it? And that's how Viagra became one of the best-selling medications. This is the generic name sildenafil, so again, I will not tell who of you knew the product well, that's perfectly fine too. But so this is the Viagra. And then here, most recently, the Pfizer Vaccine, right? A company in Germany, BioNTech, they worked on mRNA technology since 2008 for cancer. And they realized when COVID happened, oh my God, we can use this technology to tackle COVID, and produced one of the first COVID vaccinations. I'm also very excited that we have a lot of serendipitous examples in this room. One of my favorites, of course, my wonderful parents-in-law, Happiest Baby. It's a fantastic, so they developed this snoo, which is a baby bed, AI-enabled. And so essentially you can put the baby in, it's safe, you can sleep 2 hours more. And Harvey gave a speech, right, at a conference. And you talked about, he has a book here called Happiest Baby, and you talked about that book, right? And someone in the audience said, hey, why don't you develop a product that can actually do that? And Harvey connected the dots, right, and did something with it and said, okay, we will develop that product. So it's one of my favorite examples. And right next to Milo, right, Milo is an absolute dot connector. And he, they have a primary school here in Belgrade where it's extremely selective, right, for the next generation of entrepreneurs. And when COVID happened, they said, you know what? Now we have to take it online. They took it online, trained trainers to use it, and now work with Ukrainian refugees and others to help them make it happen. The point is that what all these examples and hundreds of examples that we've studied over the last decade have in common is that it's not just an event that happens to us. It's not just something, that falls into our lap, but it's always the same process. It's always the same process of some unexpected event happening, right? That might be unexpected movement in male participants' trousers. It might be farmers calling up and saying, your washing machine's breaking down. It might be someone speaking at a conference and talking about an amazing idea. Whatever it is, like there's some unexpected event that then someone has to do something with it. Someone has to connect the dots. Someone has to say, yes, we can do something with this, and then also have the tenacity to actually go through with it. Right? It's not enough to just bump into the potential love of your life in a coffee shop. You then have to go on dates, right? You have to actually, make it happen. Same with a product. It's not enough to just have that idea for Viagra. You then have to develop the product and go through with it. And the beautiful thing is once we look at this as a process, we can influence it. We can create more potential serendipity triggers. We can learn how to connect the dots better, and we can build a muscle for that tenacity to actually make it happen. And so that's what I'll talk about today. How do we develop more of these triggers? How do we learn how to spot them when they are there? And what do we actually do with this? And so serendipity is smart luck. It's the luck we can create ourselves, which is very different from blind luck, right? Being born into a nice family, all these kind of things we can't really choose, at least not that I know. But what you can choose is that you can actually create that smart luck that brings you this. Now, one of the reasons I asked you, do you consider yourself to be lucky earlier, is that a lot of times people who tend to have more luck in life tend to look very differently at life. And so there's a lot of experiments that show how people can be in exactly the same situation, exactly everything the same, but have very different outcomes depending on their mindset. And so to give you one example, one of my favorite experiments is they took people who self-identify as very lucky. So people who say, good things tend to happen to me, I'm generally lucky. And people who consider themselves to be very unlucky. So people who say, bad things tend to happen to me, I'm always in accidents, and so on. Then they take one of each, and they say, walk down the street, go into a coffee shop, sit down, and then we'll have our interview, our conversation. What they don't tell them is that there's hidden cameras along the street and inside the coffee shop. There's a 5-pound note, so money, right in front of the coffee shop door. And inside the coffee shop, there's one empty seat next to this extremely successful businessman who can make big dreams happen. Now, the lucky person walks down the street, sees the 5-pound note, picks it up, goes inside the shop, sits next to the businessman, they have a conversation, exchange business cards, and potentially an opportunity comes out of it. The unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the 5-pound note, so doesn't see it, goes inside the shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, ignores the businessman, and that's it. Now, at the end of the day, they ask both people, how was your day today? And so the lucky person says, well, it was amazing. I found money in the street, made a new friend, and potentially an opportunity coming out of it. The unlucky person just says, nothing happened. And you will see that with couples a lot of times. They go to exactly the same event, and one will just be a little bit luckier than the other at the end of the day, even though they meet exactly the same people and have exactly the same situation in front of them. And so one thing we'll talk about today is what is that difference in mindset and how we can train it. In this example, of course, it helps to be alert, right? So for example, I find a lot of money in the street because I expect it to be there, mostly pennies, unfortunately, so it doesn't change my life. It doesn't help too much. But I guarantee you, once you look for money in the street, you tend to find it more often because the unexpected tends to be hidden in a lot of different places. A lot of times, of course, it helps to speak with people, right? So extrovert people might have an advantage sometimes to then talk with that other person. But there's a lot of hope for closet introverts like myself, where a lot of times serendipity comes from silent sources. It comes from reading a book and thinking, oh my God, this could be a movie, this could be a podcast. Or it comes from taking another street to work and looking into the window of a store and thinking, oh my God, this book could be, a new idea for a new theater production, whatever it is. The point is, serendipity can be everywhere once we open our eyes to it, once we open our eyes to this thing. What I'd love to do, before I go further, is to briefly do an experiment here with you. It might or might not work. If it doesn't work, I hope it's a Chatham House rule. Nobody will ever talk about it again. It never happened. What happens here stays here, I hope. But I want to show you one example of an experiment that usually I'm a big fan of, and let's see how it works. So I think in this room we're probably around 200 people, right? So in this room of 200 people, what do you think is the probability that two people have the same birthday, so that you celebrate on the same day? Is it 10%, 20%, 50%? What do you think? Who's good at mathematics? Yeah, who bids? So who is good at mathematics? So 200 people in the room. Who would say? Yeah? Okay, so that's high. So, okay, others, 10%, 20, higher? 50, yeah? 30? 10%, yes? Okay. 9, okay. 5%, 7%, 10%. Okay, perfect. So we see it's a wide range, right, of people bidding. But I think most of us would agree that the probability theoretically is relatively low, right? 200 people, 365 days. You divide that by each other, and you have 200 by 365, right? So let's say it's kind of like whatever, like 60%, like relatively low, right? What I'd love to do now is I'd love to the people in the first row briefly go through in a second and just state the name, the day and the month of your birthday, not the year. Then you could probably sue me, so please don't do that. But just the day and the month. I'm coming from the US, so everything can be sued in the US, including when I ask you for your age, probably. But if you say your day and the month, and then if anyone hears their birthday, please shout here, okay? Like here, or whatever you want to shout. It could be Belgrade, or it could be, Lola, or it could be whatever you feel like shouting. Just let us know that you have the same birthday. So we'll do that with the first two rows, and then we'll see if we can find a birthday pair in this room. If you could find here, so what's the day and the month of your birthday?
So December 2nd.
December 2nd. Do we have a December 2nd? Yes, fantastic. Okay, way. All right. So... Yes. Oh, December 3rd. Wonderful. Okay. Second pair. Okay, so now we have two birthday pairs in the room. Yes?
July 3rd.
July 3rd. Yes, next. April 1st. 9th of March. Yes. Hey. Yeah? Okay, so third birthday pair, right? Yes? 10th of July. Please shout, right, if you hear your name. Yes? 16th of July? Yeah. Yeah, here, hey. Wonderful. Okay, now we have 4 birthday pairs, right? Yes?
9/11, September.
9/11. Oh, 9/11. I think a lot of Americans might have that in common. So 9/11, yeah, September 11th. Yes?
January 14th.
January 14th. Yeah.
September 20th.
September 20.
March 3rd.
March 3rd. Yeah, okay, wonderful. Okay, 5th birthday pair, yes?
May 23rd.
May 23rd? Yes, fantastic. Okay, 6th birthday pair, yes?
September 22nd.
September 22nd?
December 19th.
December 19th?
May 7th.
May 7th? Yep.
September 1.
September 1.
December 13th.
December 13th? That's a nice one, yeah.
February 12th.
February 12th? Hey! Okay, fantastic. I think you get the picture, right? So now after 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say after 20 people, we already have 7 birthday pairs. 7 birthday pairs. If we would do the whole room, we would have like an incredibly high number. You get the picture, right? Like we could go through the whole room and it would be so many people. We would sit here until tomorrow probably. The point is, what I wanted to show you with this example is, we thought that the probability of one of those pairs would be relatively low, right? But having that, probably in this room, 30 or 40 pairs is pretty amazing, no? That there's so many potential pairs in this room. But that's actually, the reason I'm doing this with you is that this is how we think about the unexpected a lot of times, the positively unexpected. We think about it very linear, right? We think we can make a plan and then life plays out, but there are so many potential variables. Life is exponential, like this function. So this function, right, it's not only the 200 people in the room. If Nina has 199 people in this room who could have her birthday, Harvey still has 198 people. You still have 197 people, then you 196, and so on. And so the point is, it's the connections between you that are exponentially many. And so it is actually extremely likely, and that's why in the first row you were completely right, that the probability now was essentially almost 100%, that in this room we would have a birthday pair. Already with 23 people, the probability is 50%. 23 people. Next time you're in a group of 30 people or 40 people, try it out and you will see, you will usually find a birthday pair. With 23 people, 50%, and then 40, 50, 60 people, it's almost 99.999% when you have 70 and more. So the point is, that is how a lot of times we look at life, right? We assume we know things because we think linearly, step by step, but life is exponential. There's exponentially many opportunities out there, but we tend to miss them all the time because we don't believe they're there. It's like with the money in the street. If you don't assume that there might be money in the street, you step over it all the time. If you would count all the money you stepped over in your life, you might now build a big house or something like this in your life. But the point is, that happens in all areas of life, right? You could have met the potential love of your life in a coffee shop, but you didn't see it, and so it didn't happen. So the point here is, what I wanted to show you is that one of the biggest biases a lot of us tend to have is that we tend to underestimate the probability of how likely it is that something positively unexpected can happen in our life once we open our eyes to it. Now, how can we study these things? So we use a lot of experiments, right? So we a lot of times do experiments like this, the one I mentioned, where you put people into the same situation, and then you say, do something in the same situation and see how they react differently to the unexpected. Or we go into different locations and we see, what do people over time, right? So when something unexpected happens, what do they over time with that, and how does it unfold? And so we try to then track that down. Now, what is holding us back? Why don't we all have so much more luck and serendipity in our lives? Well, of course, there's objective factors, right? So I do a lot of work, for example, in Kenya or in the Cape Flats in Cape Town, where structurally, you know, when you're in extreme poverty, of course, like your potential base level of serendipity, the potential of serendipity that you can potentially have is much lower than in the West Village in New York, where you have access to education and networks. So there's very different starting positions. What's fascinating, though, is what our research shows is that in almost every situation, there are some people who have a little bit more luck than others in extreme poverty and in other situations. And so the exciting thing is then, when we think about mindset, we should at the same time think about structures, right? Like helping people to have a higher base level so that everyone has the same opportunities, but also everyone in any context can at any given time develop their mindset in some way or the other. And so that's something that I found very fascinating. Another thing that holds us back a lot of times is functional fixedness, right? So functional fixedness is this idea that, you know, the hammer-nail problem. You know, when you use the hammer to get the nail into the wall, and you need the nail in the wall, you will always look for a hammer, right? Because that's the one method that you know, so use it. Other people who never heard about a hammer, right? A kid might not look for a hammer. A kid might just look for a heavy object that they can just use, like a stone, right? And just do the nail with a stone. And so the point is, the same is in business and life, that we get so used to some methods that that's the one method, and that blinds us to other methods that might be much more effective or much quicker or much more efficient. Another one here, and that's one of my absolute favorites, another bias, is post-rationalization. I work a lot with executive teams, so with CEOs and board members, and when a CEO goes into a board meeting, they will always say something like this: I had this plan, then we did exactly this, and then exactly this happened, right? Zack, zack, zack. I had control, I had authority, I knew exactly what was going to happen. So exactly like this, right? This was the plan, and then we did exactly this. Everyone in this room knows that that's not the truth. Everyone in this room knows that life is more like this, right? Life is a bit more like a squiggle where, unexpectedly this, and then this thing came, and then this insight came, and then you run into this person, and so on. And so one of the things we're doing with this work is to say, if we give leaders a toolkit where they don't have to talk about the unexpected as a threat, right? Usually when you're in a company, you see the unexpected as something that questions your authority. If you just made your marketing plan and then a farmer calls you up and says, I use your machine differently, you think, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. Oh my God, this is something like this doesn't fit our plan. If you build the unexpected into your plan and say, great, we will build that idea directly into the plan, then actually you make it more active. You say we create a culture that allows for these unexpected moments to happen, and that's what I'll talk about later today. How do we get such a culture into an organization, but also in our families, in our communities, that allows us to see the unexpected as a friend, as an ally, as someone who actually gives us a lot of new ideas and a lot of potential meaning and joy. And so a lot of times, by the way, we might also do that with our CV, right? I'm sure when you go to a new employer, you might say, I wanted to do this, then I wanted to go into this area, and then this area. Yeah. Or maybe at a conference, you just ran into someone who told you about a new opportunity, and you ended up there. And so the point is, once we're more honest about how life really unfolds, it empowers us to talk about that a lot of times the unexpected is such a big part of our journey, and that's a great thing. That's the sign of a great mindset, and not the sign that you lost control. And in our work with executives, a lot of times they always ask, oh, but doesn't it look like that I lose authority when I'm not always in control? Well, it's an illusion of control, right? The illusion of control is that you can plan everything and know everything. But what a lot of the leaders we work with do, so for example, Ajay Banga at MasterCard, what he did, MasterCard, they were an amazing company, but they felt we need some more purpose, we need to do more with our employees. So they said, let's bring 500 million people into the financial system who were previously unbanked. Let's use our technology to tackle a real big global challenge here. And so what he did here, the CEO, was here's a North Star. Here's a big purpose of where we're going. Now everyone knows what we rally around. Everyone knows where we're going. Here's a strategy. But I'm telling you from the beginning that I will adjust the strategy based on local communities telling me we need a different product, or based on employees saying maybe there's a better way to do it. And so what he did was he built the idea in that we shouldn't have functional fixedness based on our strategy. We shouldn't blind ourselves based on this. And so now what he does is he has a lot of authority because he gives a sense of direction, but also whenever someone comes with a new idea, it's not a threat to his authority, but is actually supporting his strategy of building the unexpected into that. And one example of this was, when COVID happened, I was in the US, in New York, and it was fascinating to see how the governors, so the people who run the different states, reacted very differently. The old school mindset of the old school leadership was, I'm the governor, and this is the government of the state, and we will give an exact timeline. Now we close down the state, and we will open up exactly again on this and this date, right? So here's an exact timeline, we will open up exactly on May 16th. The new type of leadership style was to say, our priorities are public health and economic health. Here's an approximate timeline, but we will adjust that timeline based on new information coming in. Now, what happens is, in an uncertainty environment like this, whenever new information comes in, the old school leadership style now has an incentive to hide the information, right? Because it doesn't fit your strategy. You can't adjust your timeline now because you will look weak, right? Because you promised that timeline. Or you adjust the timeline and you look like a weak leader. The new type of leadership style, you can now adjust your timeline and you can say, I told you from the beginning I would adjust the timeline, and now you look strong by adjusting the timeline. And that's really the idea that, so Thomas Lindeberger, for example, who's the CEO of Cummins, one of the largest companies in the world, he would say, look, cultivating serendipity is the only leadership skill you need in times of uncertainty. Because in times of uncertainty, I cannot give you certainty. I cannot give you the exact step every day, but I can give you clarity. And by giving you clarity, you can then tell me in every given moment what works better than in the other. And so that's really saying, let's legitimize the idea that the unexpected has to become part of the plan. Now, what are some strategies? Now, we talked about some of the biases, but what I'd love to do in the second part today is talk about some of the strategies that we can all have more luck and more creative ideas and more opportunities in our lives. This here is the hook strategy. My wonderful wife Lexi is an absolute superstar in this, as is Harvey and Nina, and Milo is extremely well, and Ivana. I think we have a lot of superstars here, Maria, who do that automatically. And this is one of my absolute favorite mechanisms on how you can create more serendipity in your life, which is to think about what are some memorable talking points I can build into conversation so that other people can connect the dots and use whatever they are most interested in. So to give you an example, when you're at a conference like this, you might have a lot of people who come to you and say, so what do you do? Right? What do you do? What do you professionally do? Things like this, right? And the normal answer puts us into autopilot, right? We might say, oh, I'm a student, I'm a professor, I'm working at, HBO, whatever it is. But Ollie Barrett, who's the founder of Startup Britain in the UK, what he would do if you ask him that question, he would say something like, I'm a technology entrepreneur, recently started reading into the philosophy of science, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. And so what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 potential hooks, 3 potential points where you could say, oh my God, such a coincidence, we are hosting piano sessions, you should stop by. Oh my God, such a coincidence, my sister is teaching on the philosophy of science, you should come by and give a guest lecture. The point is we can all think about what are 3 or 4 interest areas we have, right? I want to expand my business to Poland. I want to, write a new novel, whatever it is. And then building that into conversations as a side note. And it's amazing how the most unexpected people pick it up and say, oh my God, such a coincidence. My uncle wrote a book and they have a publisher. I should put you in touch. Those kind of things where there's so much social capital in this room and in other rooms, but we don't know about it because we don't give people the opportunity to connect those dots if we don't give them those hooks. And so it's really getting out of this autopilot of saying, this is what I do, to, oh, here are a couple of dots that you could connect. So those of you later, when you're mingling with each other, please do take the crazy German as an excuse to ask each other those kind of questions and give those kind of answers about what you're really interested in, because that's where all those meaningful coincidences happen, right? Where someone might say, oh my God, you're looking for a job here? I mean, for example, right, Happiest Baby, always hiring amazing new people, right? Oh my God, such a coincidence, the founder sits right here. And so it's kind of those things where I think there's these coincidences you can create in doing so. Another strategy, and by the way, that's also how we ask questions, right? Do we just ask, what do you do? Or do we ask, what do you enjoy doing? Or something like that. That slightly changes it, but opens up that possibility for it. Here's another example, which is using crises as inflection points. That's a lot of times, in companies, when something doesn't go well, we try to hide it, right? We don't want to be the failure, the loser who messed something up, right? And so the problem is we don't really learn from each other because most of the learning comes from things that don't work. It's the same in families, right? Parenting, right? Kids probably want to hide a little bit what didn't go and so on. But what if we could have practices that allow people to share the things that didn't work and not celebrating what didn't go right, right? Nobody wants to be a failure. Nobody wants to be celebrated for that. But celebrating the learning from it. And so one of the favorite strategies that I'm a big fan of is the project funeral. Anyone came across the project funeral? No. So it's one of those, where a company I've been working with, they do it really well. Essentially, the idea is that you take projects or ideas that haven't really worked, and then the person who's responsible for it presents it in front of people from other divisions, from other parts of the company, and reflects on what they learned from it. So it's not about celebrating failure, but celebrating the learning. And so in this one example, there was this amazing technology, a window glass. And the idea is the light doesn't reflect, right? Amazing technology, but they realized the market is not big enough for it. So they laid it to rest and they said, okay, we learned that the market wasn't big enough. Someone in the audience goes, hey, have you considered what this would mean for solar? Have you considered if you take this technology into a solar context, how much energy that could absorb? And that is how unexpectedly their solar division emerged and became one of their key revenue drivers. Why? Because there was the opportunity as a group to connect the dots for each other for things that hadn't worked in the end. Of course, that works better when you have psychological safety, right? When you know that people won't stab you in the back if you talk about something like this, which is why I'm such a big fan of purpose-driven leadership, of the question of how do we get people to rally around a common purpose to then have an incentive to work with each other. It's always, you know, when, who of you has watched Suits, the show? Anyone? Yeah? Oh, wow, quite a few, yeah? What do you think about it? Yeah, yes, finger up, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yes, there you go, fantastic. Well, and the protagonist is another Harvey, right? So that's a wonderful, it sounds like the good guys are the Harveys in the world. But so, exactly, so the protagonist in Suits, right, this Netflix show, he's Harvey Specter, this kind of high-powered lawyer, and, you know, there's this other protagonist, Louis Litt, and you know a lot of times they fight each other all the time. But then whenever they have to defend their protege Mike, whenever they have to fight for him, they are the best collaborators and they make everything happen because they have a joint purpose now. They rally for someone that they want to fight for. And that's the same with a mutual purpose in an organization, right? Giving people a purpose that they can relate to, which if you're interested, we could definitely go into. We'll have a Q&A session in a second. We could definitely talk more about how do you create this purpose in a company and how do you relate it, right? Because a lot of people talk about purpose and impact and so on, but it's usually disconnected from the day-to-day reality of an employee, right? When you come into the company on Monday morning, you don't feel necessarily what the CEO said a few days ago. And so it's really the question, how do you integrate that into the day-to-day? How do you integrate that into performance systems, into who you hire, and so on? I've always been a big fan, by the way, of the question, when you hire people, to ask them, do you consider yourself to be lucky? There's no right or wrong answer, right? But the fascinating thing is when someone says 1, it's maybe the person who will not spot a lot of opportunities, right? If they consider themselves to be very unlucky. But also if they are 10, they might be slightly overconfident, and that might also be an issue. So it's interesting to figure out, it triggers nice conversations to ask people those questions. They did that at Zappos, this a company that was kind of leading in terms of employee happiness. And they used to ask their employees when they hired them, do you consider yourself to be lucky? And they essentially try to figure out, hey, okay, how much opportunity will they spot in the future versus will they miss a lot of opportunities? Another strategy, by the way, is to ask people in the weekly meeting, what surprised you last week? It's a very simple question, but by doing that, you essentially incentivize people to look out for these things where they might say, oh, it surprised me that people use our product differently. Maybe we should develop a new product. And so that kind of saves you a lot of costs, but also it essentially brings up these new ideas into the company. Now, to wrap this up, a couple of more strategies here on how we can cultivate serendipity. I already mentioned this idea of having some kind of North Star as a company, some kind of purpose. I think, especially for young people, I know we have a couple of students here, there's a lot of pressure, right? Find your purpose, find your passion, find something that's relevant. I'm not a big fan of that necessarily. I think it's much more effective to look for curiosities. What are you curious about? Because that a lot of times then will lead you into, oh my God, this feels meaningful to me. It feels meaningful to me to work on this. And that actually then lets you find your purpose versus, it's like happiness, right? Once you look for happiness, it's very hard to find. Versus if you are in a context that makes you happy, then you say, oh, actually, I'm pretty happy here, right? And so it's the same with trying to identify what are some curiosities and then putting ourselves into those environments. We talked about enabling serendipity spotting. And then the third one is really, how do we leverage technology and space design? You know, the pandemic, COVID, and the world has taken away quite often these kind of water cooler moments, right? Where you could bump in the cafeteria into the boss of your boss, and then out of that conversation comes the new opportunity, things like this. In a world where we have a bit less of this, how do we recreate that online? And so I'm a big fan of virtual coffee trials, where the idea is that people across the organization sign up for a couple of times, and then they get randomly matched with people across the organization for a very quick coffee. And that coffee is essentially, you know, an inspiring question like, what is a problem you have at the moment? How can I help you? And so by doing this now, you have a 10-minute quick chat with the boss of your boss or with other people, and it recreates that sense that you're part of something bigger than just your own team. It's always the same team we interact with, right? We don't seem to be very connected, but also it creates that serendipity within companies. Then also, how do we create that in spaces, in office spaces? Who of you has come across Pixar, the company? Anyone? Hands up? Pixar? Yeah? So Pixar is fascinating for a couple of reasons. One is they've been one of the most creative companies in the world for a very long time. They created all these movies, right? Finding Nemo and all these beautiful kind of not cartoons, but like beautiful like visual movies. And what I found fascinating about them is when Steve Jobs, the Apple guy, was still their CEO, architects, like he wanted a new building, like for his employees. And he told the architects, get me a new building. So he said, run and get me a new building and give me some ideas. And so, and I talked yesterday with a wonderful interior designer, by the way. I'm very intrigued. Marco, hopefully, we'll talk more about this. But he essentially kind of, told them, come with an idea of what the most effective building is for our company so that we can be creative. And so those architects came back and they said, let's do 3 buildings. One for the management team, one for the developers, and one for the creatives. What did Jobs say? It's a really bad idea, right? Like you're separating exactly those people who should actually be coming together, right? And so he said, no. Let's do one building with a big atrium in the middle. Let's put the coffee shop right in the middle so that people have to bump into each other there. Let's put the mailbox of the manager right next to the mailbox of the creative, right next to the mailbox of the developer, so that those people have to bump into each other all the time. And then they realize, oh my God, that's just a human being too. It's not just a nerd. They're actually pretty cool. Okay, and so you realize those people are not that different from me than I thought they would. And so it increases that interaction between them, but also the communication between them. Jobs also wanted to build the only toilet in the middle of the thing, but his board voted him down. They were like, no, people need a couple of more toilets than just one toilet in the middle. But sometimes you have to go to extremes, I guess, to get people to interact. But the point is, there's a lot of approaches that companies like Google, Bloomberg, and others use to have more serendipity happen because they know that's where most of the innovation comes from. That's where up to 50% of inventions and innovations come from those kind of encounters. And so it's really about saying, how do we use the spaces for this? And then I'm also a big fan, and that's really motivated, and that's the fourth and one of the last strategies that I want to talk about. This is very motivated from our work in sub-Saharan Africa. So over the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time, especially in Kenya and in South Africa, and I've been fascinated by how creative people are in those contexts, how resourceful people in extreme poverty are. And I will never forget the first time I went there. I asked a local entrepreneur there, who's now a close friend, I asked, what should I never ask you? Me as the white guy coming into your context, what should I never ask you, what everyone else asks? Like all these funding people, all these World Bank people, what do they always ask you? And so he said, never ask me first, how can I help you? Because if you ask me, how can I help you, you put me into the role of the victim, the beneficiary, someone who needs your benevolence. But if you come in and say, what's already here, how can we make the best of it, you can still think about the resourcing, but then we start on the same level and we see each other as dignified people. And to me, that was a big shift, because what they do is, so it's a company called Reconstructed Living Labs, and it's people who come from very rough backgrounds in the Cape Flats in Cape Town, former drug dealers, like really kind of very tough backgrounds. And they built a low-cost education methodology, something like 10 steps to use social media to build your business. And then they go into other impoverished communities, and instead of asking, how can we help, they ask, what's already here, and how can we use this here? They look at a former drug dealer and they say, great, that person will have a lot of social capital, right? They will be very well connected. They will be very creative. They just channeled their energy in the wrong ways. So if we can turn that person into a teacher, now it's cool to be a teacher. Now the cool kid actually becomes the teacher, and you can turn a local community around. And so what I found inspiring about this is when they look at an old garage, they don't see an old garage. They see a potential training center. When they look at a former drug dealer, they don't see the former drug dealer. They see a potential teacher. And it's this idea of seeing a little bit more in people and situations that serendipity thrives on, right? When I see more in moments, that's where a lot of times these opportunities come from. Of course, in big companies, a lot of times the challenge is that people are kind of like in their silos and they can't really break out of them. And so one example, if you take a company like Philips, Philips is one of those companies that for a very long time were organized in silos, right? So for example, you would have a tomography department, right? If you work in a tomography department, you will only think about how can I improve tomography, right? oh yes, innovation means better tomography. If you would rename that away from the solution to the problem, which is precision diagnosis, right? You want to get better at diagnosing, and you would call that department precision diagnosis, now you enable people to look for other ways to do precision diagnosis that might not be tomography, right? It could be so many different other ways to diagnose people, and so now people can look beyond their silo and do that. And so the fascinating thing is, with our labs in the Cape Flats, but also with companies like Philips, it really depends on how we frame questions, how we frame departments, what people are able to do, and what can potentially happen in those moments. Now, to wrap this up, serendipity doesn't fall from the sky, right? It falls down here. I'm very proud of this slide, by the way. I'm usually not that good with PowerPoint, but this is kind of my wonderful wife and we co-created this slide with, since I've been here in Belgrade, I've had a bird's poop on my arm. I've spilled water in the glass, so it seems like a lot of it actually falls from the sky here in some way. But in general, of course, it doesn't necessarily always fall from the sky, and so that's really the key message. So to wrap this up, and then we can have a conversation. I'm a big fan, by the way, that a lot of the knowledge usually is in the room rather than in the head of the presenter, so I'm also very much looking forward if anyone wants to share a quick example of how in their life they create more serendipity or so, you'd be very welcome also to bring that in a second. Now, a couple of closing thoughts. One is really, nobody likes change too much, right? We all talk about innovation and new things and whatever, but once it happens in a company or in a family or so, it's like, oh my God, like this threatens, right? And so something that I've felt that helps a lot is to reframe it away from what's the worst thing that can happen if we do it, if we innovate, if we do X, Y, Z, to what's the worst thing if we don't do it. Yes, the worst thing if we do it is that your job might change, but the worst thing if we don't do it is that your job will not be here, right? So it's those kind of things where reframing that in companies is a big thing, but also personally, right? So if you think about the coffee shop situation at the beginning, right? I used to have a fear of rejection, right? So if I would be in the coffee shop and there would be this kind of potential love interest, I would be like, do I go? Do I not go? And then sometimes I wouldn't go. Or in the meeting, right? The unexpected idea, and I would be like, yeah, but I'm maybe not senior enough to bring it up. And then afterwards, I would feel this regret, right? This, I should have talked, I should have brought that up. And so one thing that I found very helpful in my life is to say, instead of thinking about the worst case that can happen if you do it, right? The sting of rejection, going to a speaker at a conference, speaking with them, where they could reject you, and that stings. But the worst thing actually being to not doing it and then running around the whole day thinking about what could have happened had I spoken with a person. And so I think that reframing away from what's the worst thing that can happen if I do it to if I don't do it, that actually a lot of times makes us then kind of do that a little bit more. A second one really is around embracing imperfection. There's a lot of kind of, I think, in a lot of companies especially, but also in general, there's these kind of masculine values of like, we have to be perfect and portray everything as strength. But you know what? Everyone knows that that's not the case. Like, yes, some people feel that might be, but everyone else knows that that is not the case. And so, in a way, we know that a lot of times people are winging it, and that's okay. Like here at Pixar, for example, the founder at the beginning would come into a meeting, and he would say something like, at the beginning, all of our movies are bad, and now we start the meeting. And so by doing this now, he gives people the license to not have the perfect idea they come up with when they have unexpected ideas, but to also have an idea that's not so baked yet, right? That's not so mature yet, but they bring it up and they bring it in. And that gives people the license, especially younger people, the license to not feel they always have to be perfect, because that actually limits the potential for people bringing in their ideas and for really sharing ideas, because they feel they have to like pretend that they have researched it for 50 days and found something. It comes back to the post-rationalization, right? That there's such a bias towards like, hey, have you researched this and X, Y, Z? A lot of times, look, after the fourth glass of red wine, you can speak to any CEO you want, and they will tell you, you know what? Today I pretended I knew so much, but actually I just had to make it up, and that's, but that's how life is, right? And so it's really that idea that a lot of times it's our intuition that guides us, and then we make up reasons for it, right? We Google what could be a reason for that. That's why we need consultancies a lot of times, right? CEO wants to do something and then has a consultancy come in to give him some reasons or her some reasons to actually make it happen. Now, what's one of the other things? A happy ending depends on when we stop the story, right? If we stop the story at, I was broken up with, someone broke up with me, then we will always be the person who was broken up with. But if that becomes the inflection point, the starting point to finding someone new who's the true love of your life, then actually that was just the inflection point for it. And so not stopping the journey too early, that's the tenacity a lot of times where a lot of companies that face bankruptcy, I mean, the companies I founded, both companies at some point faced bankruptcy, but that was the best thing that could have happened to us. Because in those bankruptcy moments, we had to rethink our business model. We had to rethink how we work more efficiently, more effectively, and that actually was, when we look back, the best thing that could have happened to us. Even in the moment, it felt tough and it felt, oh my God, survival. But actually afterwards, it forced us to rethink a lot of it. And so if we stop at those moments, then that will always be the moment. But if we continue, then that's working out. So I would be remiss, the German in me would be remiss to not close on a philosophical note, that part of the session. I grew up in Heidelberg in Germany, where Goethe wrote a lot of his poems on a beautiful philosopher's way. And he had this beautiful idea that later inspired Viktor Frankl, which is that if you take someone as they are, you make them worse. But if you take them as what they could be, you make them capable of becoming what they can be. And you know, that's really what serendipity is. Serendipity is about potentiality. Serendipity is about what could be. It's about seeing a little bit more in a moment and then doing something with that moment and connecting the dots and turning that into positive outcomes. And that's what I always loved about Viktor Frankl. I mean, Viktor Frankl survived the Holocaust. Like, he was in a concentration camp. As you can imagine, it's the toughest situation you can ever face. Objectively, there's no hope, but he created meaning. Objectively, there was no meaning, and he said, you know what? Every day I will speak with a fellow prisoner here and make them feel better about themselves. And by doing this, now I have a reason to wake up tomorrow morning. So even in an objectively meaningless situation, he created a new meaning. And that's actually, a lot of times serendipity is about imbuing meaning in crises and accidents and something falling down, right? If someone now drinks their coffee and it falls down in front of the top CEO of the company that should hire you, right? We could either see, oh my God, that's such a big accident, or it could be like a beautiful bonding experience over, oh my God, haha, whatever it is. And so it's really the kind of meaningful, seeing some meaning in the situation. And with this, my editor tells me I should mention that this is the book where you can find all of this. Connect the Dots is the paperback, and then the hardcover is the Serendipity Mindset. With this, thank you so very much. And I think I hand over back to you for the Q&A, or shall I do that? I'll be happy.
Q&A.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much for now. Thank you.